Probably the most difficult parsha in Torah. It's hard to say what is difficult, what isn't difficult, but relatively on for us to get a handle on is Parshas Bereishis, the cosmic Yesh Me'ayin, and all of the descriptions and the range of Medrashim and Rishonim. So let's take a few points that to work with. The fundamental problem that the Bnei Yisachar talks about in for the Torah Jew is getting a grip on the question of Yediyah and Bechira, because everything stands or falls on the root reality that man was created by Tzelem Elokim in the image of the Rebbeinu Shalom, meaning the neshama, and that he's a Baal Bechira, unlike the behemoths and chayas, which purely reactive according to instinct. According to the Rambam, the hashgacha on them, for them, is collective as a species, whereas each individual is entering into a partnership. That's why the Vayachulu is, Chazal say, the Gemara on Shabbos, that somebody who recites Vayachulu Friday night, Vayachulu Shemaim was V'chol Chalachim Yom HaShvi, is a partner with the Rebbeinu Shalom in Ma'aseh Bereishis. Partnership because Sha'om Olam Dai, that the Rebbeinu Shalom said, as it were, the way it's described to us and the way we get a little bit of a handle on trying to understand it, is that the Rebbeinu Shalom has no limitations and therefore could have created everything to its ultimate completion. But somehow in his infinite wisdom, he left room for man to participate in this completion. That was the rotzen of the will of the Rebbeinu Shalom, and then the extraordinary feature of the most extraordinary feature of creation becomes tzimtzum, the constriction and restriction, and leaving room for man to enter into the picture, to do his thing. Man, of course, means man and woman. The beautiful description on a cosmic level. Rabbi Yoshe Ber Soloveitchik Zatzal, one of his lectures on Ishu Beisa, talks about the dimension that initially Chazal also indicate that Zocho and Nekeva Boasam, they were created similar to other mammals, that Zocho and Nekeva. But just like man was given this Tzelem Elokim, there was another dimension of a relationship that the Tzela that was taken from Odom Arishon was to create the neshama of this dimension of Isha that would be a chavrusa and would then create the possibility of projecting forward, that there would be a continuity of not just bodies, but neshama and guf combined together in this new reality. Lahavdil, but sometimes think of in the early part of the 20th century, the popular culture in America. Radio was then the medium. There were programs for children, and there was one of the most popular and famous was the Lone Ranger. The Lone Ranger was begun in Detroit, and in the early part of the 20th century, I think it was a fellow named Stryker that began it. And it began with the Lone Ranger, and then shortly it became evident that there was a problem that was exceedingly boring the Lone Ranger alone, just the hoofbeats of his horse Silver. So he needed chavrusa. He needed a tanto. So tanto had to be created to create chavrusa. There had to be interaction. A human being, probably that inherent in that yesod, in that fundamental principle, is that man is only man. That's what the Neim Zmiris, David HaMelech says, that v'terasreo ma'at melukim. Everybody's missing something. The Rebbe Shem designed us that way, so that we should need each other, says the Maram Shek. Teatrehu hodav v'kovod teatrehu. That therefore beauty and majesty will envelop him, will enclose him, because he then becomes an Oved Hashem with fundamentally recognizing that he is only a piece, a part of the action, and therefore he's going to need others, primary in the others, and bringing together body and soul, as Rabbi Yeshivat so beautifully describes, was this woman who will be mashlim. She's going to bring a certain dimension of aesthetics, of spirituality to the relationship that man, in a sense, needed for his completion and for his continuity, and to project that forward. Because since man is incomplete, in time he's incomplete. He doesn't live forever. That's the Gzeira after the Chet of Adam Rishon. And because that is the Gzeira, and he doesn't live forever, and he needs others, so then the Hashloma, the completion, will come about through his bringing other generations and continuing the essential message that we are creatures created by a creator, and that the ultimate good is fulfilling his plan in the universe, and we are parts and pieces of that totality. In a certain sense, the Somafoshim bring that the psikta that says that the Loshen Vayachal is also can be understood from Klilas Yofi, from seeing each piece of the universe in its place, then brings about a sense of completion. That's what happened on Shabbos. It seems to be a stira that Vayachulu, Hashemayim Oretz, it was completed. Over there, it's the some of the Mefoshim, I believe it's the B'chor Shor that points out that the Vayachulu mean it. Why is it said in a reflexive way? Because the Rebbeinu Shem doesn't physically do his rotzen. We call it dibur, but it's his rotzen as such, expressed in linkage to his creation of a material reality, expressed as dibur, as this bridge, dover-ness, doveracity, that is connecting to a substance that becomes tangible as he willed it into being. It's not physical effort, that the expenditure of caloric energy. And that's why on Shabbos, the Shmiras Shabbos has nothing to do with the effort. I can carry a table with 10 people sitting on it around the room in the Dalet Amos of the house. I cannot transfer the minutest item, a paper cup, from Rishus Yochid to Rishus Rabbim if there is no Eruv. So it's not the effort, it's what the Torah calls, Yetz Hashem, talk more about that by Maleches Machshavas, what the creative endeavor, what the Torah describes, and we learn that from the Mishkan. Okay. So the Rebbeinu Shalom, then Rashi in the Medrash indicates that the Ramban, Rashi and Chumash, that creation, Yesh Me'ayin, was the first day. Then there was Yesh Me'yesh, on each day taking out Me'akoach El Apol, the particular realities that had to be brought into existence on a material level. And each day, when did it become evident that that creation had been completed? On the day that there was no other creation. When was that? Shabbos. So that indicates that since nothing new was introduced now, yesterday everything was finished. That Bayom Hashvi, that with the coming of the Shvi, doesn't mean in that day. It means with the coming of that day, a human being cannot fix an exact time. He needs Tosfos Shabbos, he needs a Ben Hashmoshes, he needs a margin to be able to protect, not violating the Kedusha of Shabbos. Whereas the Rebbeinu Shalom can split second enter into it. So it seemed as if it was Yom HaShvi, but others interpreted that it means with the coming of Shabbos, it became then evident retroactively that everything was completed yesterday. Chazal say that the posuk that Ele Todu Shemayim V'Oretz B'hi Borom, when they were created, V'yom Asosel Hashem Elokim Eretz V'Shemayim. B'hi Borom, Chazal teach us, is B'Avrom, with Avrom. The world would be hanging in a state of suspended animation, that waiting to see if Avram would pick up the ball to run, to do what had to be done, to bring Tikkun HaOlam, that the correctives that would be necessary for the failures of Olam Harishon, Chava, and the earlier generations. Meshech Chochmah is medayik. Why in the beginning of the pasuk does it say Ele Todu Shemayim V'Oretz? V'hi Borom, with Avram. V'yom Asos Hashem Elokim Eretz V'Shemayim. Why does it switch? Beginning it said Shemayim V'Oretz, and then Eretz V'Shemayim. Says Rabbi Simcha that until the time of Avram, there were people walking the planet that could testify to creation Yesh Me'ayin. There were people who knew Adam Harishon, and they were still walking around. By the time, and they described what had been their experience and their testimony. By the time of Avram, it's going to work differently. It's going to work now with his reason, Avram. As Pashas Lech Lecho, the Medrash Rabbah says that he raw bir dalekes. He works inductively from the fact to inductively understand what might have been the cause of these facts. And by process of elimination, Avram rules out the happenstance, chance, as so many scientists today are, even those who subscribe to Darwin's description of the selectiveness and the progression of the species, but not how it began, not how the everything could have been in place for that to happen, for the projection of the necessary DNA to reproduce, to be selectively interested and directed, survival oriented. Why? Who created that orientation and that design? Too much design to ignore. Many non-Jewish and Jewish non-Talmudic yet scientists who go that direction, that it's too much of a problem to chalk it up. It's a more of a problem. I'm not talking about the Cambrian explosion, which they have such massive missing gaps, which also seems to require some kind of an intervention from the outside, not the simple, simplistic high school textbook replication of the survival of the fittest. Okay. Be that as it may, from our point of view, it's clear that the Ribono Shel Olam gave room for man to have bchira. Study the evidence, try and understand it, but come to an objective conclusion which isn't predetermined by your biases and your prejudices and your inner needs, which are governing you rather than you them. The Chet of Adam Arishon is understood by many Meforshim as the need for and the failure to resist transcending mere indulgence to the extent of looking for another exotic physical experience, another level of trying to create new dimensions and new pleasures on the purely sensual level. That was nechmad. The fruit was beautiful, was attractive. This Isha who had been given as chavrusa to help man to be mashlim, but it required a governance of these keiches, these abilities, these inclinations to be controlled, disciplined, and directed towards a positive and fulfilled end. And so the Ribono Shel Olam creates man, woman. Shabbos is then the message that keep in mind that the Ribono Shel Olam has created it all, and that you are part of that creation, and there's a mission that you have to accomplish and a message to bring to the world. Behi Barom, now Avram comes. Be'eretz, we can read it the way the Meshech Chochmah says. Now Avram is going to have to arrive at it inductively. Perhaps we might read it also that the non-Jewish world always did and always will relate to the confrontation, the showdown between the material and the spiritual. The Torah Jew understands that our challenge is to take the raw material of the physical and utilize it for spirituality. It's, as by Yaakov it says, it's a sulam mutzav alza. The sulam, this ladder, is implanted, inserted in the earth. But Rosh Hashanah Shemayim has to reach to Shemayim. But you can't skip over the step. If you stop at that step of mutzav alza and you become hedonistic and totally reconciled with a Bahamistic, an animalistic kind of a Epicurean, hedonistic indulgence of life, that's what it's all about, then you're not going to reach Shemayim, you're not climbing the ladder. Avrom is mechadesh that you can take Eretz and get to Shemayim. That's what you have to do now. And that's what he was, through Hachnosis Ochim, through Kiruv, through sharing with the rest of the world, not becoming a hermit, exiting the universe, but excelling in his spirituality and attaining to a level that he could take the physical universe, utilize the resources, and milk it for its spirituality. The Chassam Sofer says in the Tshuvas to Yeridea and the Hagdoma that Avram, why couldn't he become a malach like Hanoch? He didn't have that level of spiritual excellence. Yes, he did. But he understood what the Rebbeinu Shalom wanted was to elevate the material, the physicality of man to spirituality. That's the challenge of the Jew. And through that, he's going to achieve and attain to higher levels of spirituality. The brings to mind what the Shimon Shkop says in the introduction to the Shara Yoshe. Perhaps we've mentioned this, that why is there such a phenomenon in the Bria as mitalmida yosem ekulam, that when I teach and giving over Torah, then the Jew then gets even more. Why is there such a phenomenon? So we tend to explain it psychologically, that when somebody has the sense of urgency to clarify, but hein hadvom, well, that's the kasha. Why is the human psychology designed and created in such a manner that we get another dimension when we prepare to give over, in the act of giving over? Says of Shimon Shkop that halacha is that when somebody has hon, he has a certain amount of wealth, he has to take maisa. Bayan yofa is 20%. Minimal is 10%. The hon, the wealth of a ben Torah, Talmid Chochem, is his knowledge. So when he gives it over, just like there's a brocha that when you give over from your material wealth, you're going to get tenfold more. Similarly, when you give over from your learning, you're going to get tenfold more. That's the urgency to share. That's what Avrom is introducing. He's telling us, Behi Borom, now Eretz V'Shamayim. It's an Eretz, it's a land that's populated. The world has people. And he brings the message of a Nefesh Osher B'Choron. He's sharing the sense of the neshama, of purposefulness, of intentionality, of lack of happenstance. It's not just arbitrary. Time, how does that fit? Time is one of the Rebbeinu creations. Time is, we live in a linear world, and that's why it's difficult for us to resolve the question of Yediyah and Bechira. How does man have free will? Predestination. But that's because I'm locked into, there's a lockdown, there's a sega, there's a lockdown. I can't climb outside of time. I live within time. But the Rebbeinu Shalom, Rishonim teach us, transcends time. Rebbeinu transcends time, and therefore all time is simultaneous to him. There is no such thing as past, present, and future. It's all now. How do I have Bechira then? I have Bechira because the Rebbeinu Shalom has willed that, just like he has willed me, time, and the universe into existence. He has willed it that this patent contradiction should not interfere, that Verashus Nitna, that we can function within the seeming paradox. We have free will. Did I have free will when I was to be born? Who my parents would be? No. So much of my life is not. But that which I will be measured for, I did have choices. And those choices, when we're honest and we're objective, we can sense. Perhaps that's part of the meaning of the Medrash when the Posek says, V'ato pen yishlach, maybe he'll, the Posek in this week's Parsha, maybe he'll send his hand and he's going to take from the fruit of the Eitz HaChaim, and it's inappropriate now. It's not the timing is wrong because we live within time. The Medrash says, V'ein va'ato ela tshuva. Ato means tshuva. Why should ato be tshuva? Perhaps that's part of the message for us, is that the ato is tshuva because ato is nowness. For the Rebbeinu Shalom, everything is now. There was no past. It's not, there was and will be. It's all now. I live in a world that's linear. There was, there's going to be, and there is now. But when Chazal teach that the question was put forth, what should be done with the chayta? So the first response was Misa. It's a merit. Every time somebody is chayta, it's a rebellion against the sovereignty of the Rebbeinu Shalom, the Melech Malchei Amlochim. Next tshuva was bring a korban, the Viyim, Torah, and the Rebbeinu Shalom had to be mechadish. Tshuva is possible. Why is tshuva possible? How is it possible? Because how can you undo what was done? The answer is, when you connect to the Rebbeinu Shalom, it's v'atodik. It's a sense of nowness that transcends the seeming obstacles, limitations, lockdown, shutdown of yesterday, tomorrow, and today. It's all todayness. It's happening now. Many years ago, I knew a Jew, Nebuch was nifty young, and Rabbi Yehuda Rappel, Zatzal, was a Merkaz Arav type Jew, a clerk, Pakid, administrator in the Misad HaChinuch. He was very sympathetic to Meister Satera. He was an Ohev Torah. And he told me, Reb Nota, when Cain kills Hevel. Pasuk says, Kol dmei achicha tzolkim alai in the plural, and Rashi brings two pshatim. Why is it in the plural? Because all of the generations that might have come from Hevel, they're not going to be there now. They're not going to come. Gilgulim, separate cheshbon, but then it's not going to come in the plan A. Second shot is it was the first murder in history. They didn't know how to murder. Cain didn't know where to stab him. That would take out the neshama. That would be the mortal stabbing. Said Rabbi Yehuda Rappel to me, Reb Nota, Oto המידה שהם לא ידעו איך להוציא נשמה, אנחנו לא יודעים איך להכניס נשמה. צריכים לדקור בהרבה נקודות. Just as they didn't know how to extract a soul, a life, from the body, we don't know how to put a soul back in. You have to jab in a lot of places. Many ways. I told him I feel that that's been the Ohr Somayach educational philosophy from day one. A lot of different ideas, approaches, all sharing the same daf, all sharing coming from Sinai, but the range of different positions, Elu ve'elu divrei Elohim Chaim, sometimes differing from each other, but differing within the orbit of the Dalet Amos of Halacha. And part of the message of the limitations of our humanity is, in fact, these ranges of opinion that though they share the common base, they have that base in reality, but the Dalet Amos of Halacha, the continuity from Sinai, the deference to Shulchan Aruch and the Peskim of the Dor, yet different angles, different opinions, different positions, disagreeing with each other. That in itself is testimony to the urgency for Chavrusa, for being only a piece of the puzzle, but v'sein chalkenu v'ser l'secha. The Rebbeinu Shalom give me the wisdom, the anova, the humility to understand that I need others. And as we've quoted in the past, is Rabbi Yitzchak Volozhin quoted his father, Rabbi Chaim Volozhin, as saying, our whole purpose in being here is to do for others, because that is, in fact, the ultimate statement and the completion of our piece in the puzzle. Finally, it's Shabbos. There's another dimension of Or. It's the neshama of the world pulling the pieces together. It's the base on which everything stands. Targum touches. It's the everything stands on that. It falls. It couldn't continue without that. As the Surah Mor and the Orechaim HaKodesh both say, and as the Medrash and the Psikta and the Shem Shmuel say, Then retroactively it became understood how each piece of the puzzle fits this shlemus, which brings to a sense of the awe and wonder and magnificence of the creation. And it's that experience, plugging into that, which creates a new dimension of awe, of light, of sense of the magnificence and grandeur of creation that we step back and we feel on Shabbos. Finally, that we say that the candles on the Shabbos table, on a practical sense, there are all kinds of symbols and messages and dimensions to it, but it helps enhance and ensure shalom bayis, which is generally understood between ish ve'ishtoi. The Shemesh Shmuel brings the Noah Sedesha, says that it's also to create shalom bayis between body and soul. It's not just Einig Shabbos to indulge the body, it's the dimension of creating this sense of shlemus, that this body has now been engaged, employed, and servicing, and that is the ultimate fulfillment and greatest pleasure for body and soul, and that's what brings a sense of Yom Smochaisu, of Simcha, to Shabbos. By taking the oneg, the Ibn Ezra says it's Yom Smochais, not the mitzvah of Simcha of Yontif, different discussion, but the oneg is now being broken down into the ingredients of the gefilte fish, of the cholent, of now that these particles are then being absorbed into the molecular reality of the goof of the Odom and fusing with his neshama. Shem Yitain, that during this most challenging period and time for the world, for Am Yisrael, for the Elam HaTorah, that we should experience this sense of harmony between Guf and Neshama, between spouses, between the Tzibur, and even within the area of disagreement, the understanding that this is what brings the Kvod Shemayim, that where we differ from each other, hashkafically, as long as we are committed to the emphasis is different. But as long as we're on the same page in the Daled Amos of Halacha, then the discussion continues. And for those that are not yet there, we're leaving open the world. As the Medrash, the Zohar teaches, the hay is the bottom, the foot of the hay, very open, not hard to slip out for somebody who doesn't have the will to stay in. To re-enter is like the Baal Tshuva, and the Rebbeinu Shalom left that little opening on top of the hay, and to re-enter, and the Atodik, the Rebbeinu Shalom gives an assist because it's close to the top, and the Rebbeinu Shalom reaches out and was mechadish that there is tshuva. Tshuva for those of us who have to get from step 32 to step 33, but also for those who have to get from -1 to 0 to 1. Shem Yitain, that we should see Yeshua sort of force for all of Klal Yisrael and the world at large. Kol Tuv.